I did not plan to fall asleep on my own porch with a duffel bag for a pillow, but divorce had a way of turning a man into the kind of person who made decisions in parking lots and regretted them on wooden steps. That night started at the house Sloane and I used to own together, the one with the green front door I had painted twice because she hated the first shade and said the second one looked more settled. I had gone there for the last of my tools, a cedar chest I built before we got married, and the old clamp set my students kept borrowing because apparently high school boys believed wood held itself together through optimism. I told myself it would be simple, in and out, no emotional weather. But Sloane was waiting in the kitchen with a plumber's invoice on the counter and that calm expression she used when she wanted something to sound reasonable after it had already cut you. She said the upstairs sink was leaking again and asked if I could look at it before I loaded my things. Asked was generous. Sloane had a way of making requests sound like they had already been approved by a committee I had missed. I stood there holding a cardboard box full of chisels and sandpaper, looking at the tile I had installed with my own hands, the cabinets I had refaced during winter break, the breakfast nook where we used to sit with coffee before we forgot how to be kind to each other. I should have said no. I should have said she could call a plumber, since the invoice was already performing on the counter. Instead, I set the box down and checked the sink, because some parts of me still moved before my pride could catch up. 10 minutes later, I had tightened the valve, wiped the water, and listened while Sloane thanked me in the voice people use for reliable appliances. The real humiliation came when I reached for the small drawer beside the sink without thinking. It used to hold my spare tape measure, a pencil stub, and the little flashlight I kept for under-cabinet repairs. My hand opened it by memory. Sloane's face changed. Not dramatically, not cruelly enough to start a proper fight, just with a tiny tightening around her mouth. She said, "Rhys, you don't live here anymore." That was all. 6 words. Nothing thrown, no shouting. But they landed harder than any argument we had ever had because she was right, and because she had still expected me to fix the sink before reminding me I did not belong near the drawer. I laughed, because dry humor had carried me through faculty meetings, divorce mediation, and 9th graders discovering power tools, but it came out wrong. I said something stupid about the drawer not filing a complaint, then packed my tools with hands that suddenly felt too large for the room. I drove back to my place with the cedar chest and the truck bed and the kind of tired that made streetlights blur at the edges. My house was only 2 neighborhoods away from the old one, but it felt like I had crossed into a life assembled from leftovers. Small rental, crooked porch rail, a workshop squeezed into the garage, 2 folding chairs in the living room because I kept meaning to buy a couch that did not look temporary. I was 38 years old, a high school shop teacher, a part-time furniture restorer, and apparently a man who could explain dovetail joints to teenagers but could not explain why being useful still felt better than being unwanted. I parked in front, carried the duffel bag up the steps, then realized I had left my house keys clipped to the tool belt in the truck toolbox. That should have been easy. Walk back down, unlock it, get the keys. Instead, I sat on the porch step for 1 second, just to breathe. 1 second became 5 minutes. 5 minutes became long enough for the night air to settle into my shirt. I leaned back against the porch post with the duffel under one arm and told myself I was not sleeping outside. I was merely conducting a structural evaluation of the porch with my eyes closed. Men like me can make anything sound practical if the alternative is admitting we have reached the end of ourselves. Across the street and 2 houses down, Marlowe Keene's bakery van was gone, which meant she was still closing up her late-night coffee bar near Market Square. I knew her schedule because our neighborhood was small and because I had become embarrassingly aware of the square of warm light that appeared on her porch after midnight. She was the kind of woman who left cinnamon rolls on people's steps and acted like it was inventory management. I had fixed a shelf at her bakery 3 months earlier, and she had paid me in coffee, peach turnovers, and one look that made me forget what a stud finder was called. I must have fallen asleep thinking about that, because the next thing I knew, someone was saying my name softly enough that it did not feel like an alarm. I opened my eyes to find Marlowe standing at the bottom of my porch steps, keys in one hand, bakery tote over her shoulder, hair pulled into a messy knot with a pencil through it. She looked tired in the way people look tired after feeding strangers all night, but her eyes were wide awake. The porch light behind me had attracted moths, and one of them kept circling above her like it was trying to make the scene more dramatic. I sat up too fast, knocked my shoulder against the post, and immediately tried to become charming, which was a mistake. I told her I was testing the porch for comfort, and she looked at the duffel bag under my head, then at my wrinkled shirt, then back at me with the kind of patience that made lying feel childish. She climbed one step, not crowding me, just close enough that I could see flour dust still caught near the cuff of her black sweater. She asked if I was locked out, and I said technically, which is what men say when the answer is yes, but their pride is filing an appeal. Her mouth twitched, but she did not smile all the way. That was when I realized she was not amused. Concern sat on her face plainly, without pity, and somehow that made it harder to look at her. I told her I was fine. She said men who were fine usually slept inside houses, not on porches like abandoned porch furniture. I said the night was warm. She said my hands were cold. I looked down and saw she was right. That annoyed me more than it should have. Marlowe stood there for another second, studying me like she could see the whole ugly evening without asking for the transcript. Then she reached into her tote, pulled out a bakery box, and set it beside me on the step. I have leftover bread, terrible coffee, and a couch that does not judge divorced men for dramatic outdoor naps, she said, her voice quiet enough for only me and the moths. I tried to joke that I appreciated the couch's discretion, but the words came out thin. She must have heard it because her face softened, and that was worse. I could handle sarcasm. I could handle a woman laughing at me. I did not know what to do with warmth offered before I had earned it. Marlowe looked toward her house, then back at me, and said the line that changed the shape of the night. "Come inside." I should have refused. I should have found my keys, gone into my own house, and slept under my own roof like a man who had not just been found folded up on his porch after midnight. Instead, I stood slowly, picked up my duffel, and followed Marlowe down the steps, across the quiet yard, and toward the soft light waiting inside her house. Halfway there, I realized the most dangerous thing she had offered me was not shelter. It was dignity. Marlowe's house smelled like cinnamon, coffee, and the kind of quiet that did not ask a man to explain himself before letting him sit down. That was the first thing I noticed, probably because I was trying not to notice everything else. The soft yellow light above the kitchen sink, the bakery boxes stacked neatly beside the door, the flour dust on the edge of the counter, the old wooden table with two mismatched chairs and one chipped mug holding pens, receipts, and what looked like a tiny screwdriver. Her place was not fancy, but it had the lived-in warmth of someone who worked too much and still found a way to make a room feel awake. I stood just inside the door with my duffel in one hand, suddenly aware of my boots, my wrinkled shirt, the porch smell on me, and the fact that I had followed a woman into her house after midnight because she had found me sleeping outside like a rejected dog with teacher benefits. Marlowe locked the door behind us, then pointed toward the kitchen chair like she was directing a patient who might bolt if given too much room. I said I could stand, and she said I could also develop pneumonia and continue making poor choices, but only one of those options came with coffee. I sat, not because I was obedient, but because my legs had started making their own argument. She moved around the kitchen with practiced quiet, setting a small saucepan on the stove, pulling a loaf of dark bread from a paper bag, and opening a cabinet for 2 mugs. I told her she did not have to do all that. She said she knew. Then she kept doing it. That was the thing about Marlowe. She did not fuss. She did not flutter around a wound trying to look generous. She simply made warmth available and let you decide whether your pride wanted to freeze. I tried to make the situation smaller while she reheated coffee. I told her it had been a long day, that I had gotten locked out, that the porch was more comfortable than it looked if a person had low standards and a damaged relationship with decision-making. Marlowe glanced over her shoulder and said men did not usually sleep on porches because life was going great. I looked at my hands, rough from moving the cedar chest, and still cold despite the kitchen heat. I told her it was not as bad as it looked. She set a mug in front of me and said, "Rhys, I found you using a duffel bag as a pillow. The visual argument is not on your side." I laughed because it was funny, but the laugh scraped on the way out. She noticed that too, of course. She slid the plate of bread closer, then sat across from me without reaching for questions too quickly. So I gave her the edited version. I told her I had gone to Sloan's to pick up the last of my tools. I told her there had been a leak, because there was always a leak, or a loose hinge or a shelf that needed one more bracket. I told her I fixed it, and left. That was the version a man could say without sounding pathetic. Marlowe listened with both hands around her mug, her eyes steady on mine. She did not interrupt. She did not make the face people make when they want the painful part but want to look respectful while waiting for it. She simply let the silence stretch until my own half-truth started looking cheap sitting there between us. Finally, she said Sloane still called me when things broke. It was not a question, I said sometimes. Marlowe looked down at the steam rising from her coffee and said sometimes could be a very dishonest word. I should have been offended. Instead, I picked at the edge of the bread and felt tired enough to be honest by accident. I told her Sloane did not mean anything by it. Marlowe's eyebrow lifted. I corrected myself and said maybe she did, maybe she did not, but old habits were hard to kill when both people kept feeding them. That earned a small nod. She asked if I still wanted to be useful to her. I said no too quickly. Then I sat there with the answer echoing in my own head and admitted I did not know. Being useful was at least a shape I understood. It gave my hands somewhere to go. It made me necessary without making me vulnerable. Marlowe's face softened, not with pity, but recognition, and that was somehow more dangerous. She said being needed could feel a lot like being wanted until the moment the work was done. The kitchen went quiet after that. I looked toward the living room, where a folded blanket waited on the back of a couch that looked more comfortable than any surface had a right to look at 1 a.m. I told her I should probably go back, get my keys, sleep in my own place. Marlowe asked if leaving would make me safer or just less honest. I did not have an answer ready for that. She stood, took the blanket from the couch, and placed it on the chair beside me, not over my shoulders, not like I was a child, just close enough that taking it would be my choice. Then she said I could sleep on the couch, no speeches, no questions until morning, but if I stayed, I had to stop pretending she had found me taking fresh air. I looked at the blanket, then at her, and felt something in me give way, with a quietness that embarrassed me. I told her I had been hurt. Just those 4 words. Nothing polished, nothing funny. Marlowe's expression changed, like I had handed her something fragile, and she knew better than to squeeze it. She nodded once and said, "Then stay." I did, not because I had nowhere else to go, though technically I had misplaced my ability to enter my own house. I stayed because for once someone had seen me at my lowest and had not asked me to become impressive before offering a room. Later, lying on her couch under the borrowed blanket, listening to Marlowe rinse mugs in the kitchen, I realized the frightening part was not that she had let me come inside her house. It was that some exhausted part of me had wanted to be invited. Sleep did not come fast, even though my body had been begging for it since the moment Sloane said I did not live there anymore. Marlowe's couch was soft in a way that made my embarrassment worse, because comfort felt undeserved when a man had brought nothing into the room but a duffel bag and a bad explanation. I lay there under the blanket she had given me, staring toward the dark kitchen, listening to the low hum of her refrigerator and the old house settling around us, every few minutes. I told myself I should get up, thank her quietly, find my keys, and go back to my own place before morning made this look like something. Then I would remember the way she had said, "Then stay." Not like a favor, not like pity, but like she had decided I was allowed to stop standing outside my own pain for one night. That kind of kindness was harder to leave than a locked door. Marlowe came back from the kitchen with a glass of water and set it on the side table near my head. I told her she was going to make it impossible for me to pretend I was not being taken care of. She said that was tragic because I had been doing such brave work pretending badly. I laughed into the blanket, and she sat in the armchair angled near the couch, not too close, not far enough to feel polite. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence was strange because it did not feel empty. It felt like a room waiting for the truth to stop pacing. Finally, I told her the fight with Sloane had not really been about the sink, or the tools, or even the drawer. Marlowe looked at me over the rim of her mug and said she had guessed that. I asked if I was that obvious, and she said only to people with working eyes and a history of being useful. That was when the rest of it came out. Not neatly. I told her about fixing the sink, about reaching for the drawer by memory, about Sloane's voice when she reminded me I did not live there anymore. I told her I understood the divorce. I was not sitting around pretending we had been cheated out of some perfect ending. Sloane and I had worn each other down. We had become two people sharing a house full of finished projects and unfinished resentments. But what I had not understood, what had followed me out to the truck and then onto my porch, was how easily she could still hand me a problem and then close the door behind my usefulness. I said the humiliating part was not that I was no longer her husband. It was realizing I still knew where every shut-off valve was, every squeaky hinge, every drawer, every weak spot in a house that no longer had a place for me. Marlowe did not rush to comfort me, which somehow made me keep talking. I told her I had become a maintenance plan with a heartbeat. The sentence sounded bitter once it was out, and I tried to laugh it off immediately, but Marlowe did not let me bury it. She repeated it quietly, not mocking, just tasting the sadness in it. Then she said that being appreciated only after you make someone's life easier can train you to confuse usefulness with love. I turned my head toward her. The room was dark, except for the small lamp near the hallway, and in that light her face looked softer than usual, but not fragile. There was history there, tucked beneath the calm. I asked if she was speaking professionally as a baker or personally as a woman with very judgmental coffee. Her smile barely moved. She said both, but mostly personally. She told me she had once been with a man who praised her most when she needed the least. He loved that she remembered appointments, paid attention, brought food when his friends came over, smoothed over tense dinners, made his life feel warmer without asking him to warm anything back. For a long time, she had mistaken being easy to depend on for being cherished. Then one day she got sick. Nothing dramatic, just fever and exhaustion, and he seemed offended by the inconvenience of her needing the care she had given so automatically. She did not tell the story like she wanted sympathy. She told it like a woman pointing to a scar and saying, "This is where I learned not to touch the stove." I wanted to say something useful, which was exactly the problem. Instead, I said I was sorry, and for once I let the sentence stay simple. Marlowe looked at me then and said I was allowed to be more than useful. I almost made a joke. It rose in my throat out of habit, something about putting that on a mug or asking whether it came with health insurance. But the joke stopped because her voice did not leave room for cheap escape. She was not complimenting me. She was giving me a truth I had avoided, because accepting it would mean admitting how tired I was of earning space. I looked away first. I hated that. I hated that a sentence from a woman in a flour-dusted sweater could reach places Sloane's anger had not. Marlowe seemed to understand because she did not push harder. She only said some people would take every shelf a man built and still act surprised when he wanted somewhere to rest. The night thinned slowly after that. I must have fallen asleep sometime after the street went quiet enough for the whole house to hear my breathing. When I woke, the windows had turned pale gray around the curtains, and for one peaceful second I forgot where I was. Then I felt the borrowed blanket, smelled cinnamon in the air, and remembered everything with a full-body wince. I sat up carefully, planning to fold the blanket, leave a note, and escape before morning made me visible. But Marlowe was still there. She had fallen asleep in the armchair beside the couch, one leg tucked under her, head tilted against the cushion, arms folded around herself like she had intended to stay awake, and lost the argument gently. The sight hit me harder than it should have. She had not hovered. She had not climbed in beside me. She had simply stayed close enough to make sure I did not wake up alone. I sat there in the gray light, watching her sleep, and felt something in me go quiet in a way that scared me. For years, I had been the man people called when the pipe burst, the shelf cracked, the car would not start, the life they had chosen needed repairs. But Marlowe had seen me broken on a porch and had not asked me to fix anything before letting me in. I did not know what to do with that. I only knew that when her eyes opened and found me looking, I did not have a joke ready fast enough to save myself. Marlowe woke with the startled dignity of someone who had not meant to be caught caring. Her eyes opened, found me sitting there on the couch with the blanket folded badly in my lap, and for 1 second, neither of us spoke. Morning had softened the room, turning the kitchen counters pale gold and making everything that had happened after midnight feel both more real and less defensible. She pushed herself upright in the armchair and immediately pretended she had chosen that position for orthopedic reasons. which was generous considering one side of her hair had given up and flattened itself against her cheek. I told her the chair looked like it had won the fight. She narrowed her eyes and said my porch had already lost one battle last night, so I should be careful where I threw judgment. That made me laugh, and the sound came out easier than I expected, like sleep had loosened something in my chest without asking permission. I tried to leave quietly after that because a man can survive vulnerability once, but breakfast felt like pushing my luck. Marlowe saw me reach for my boots and said absolutely not, in the same tone she probably used on customers who tried to order black coffee and call it a meal. I told her I had already caused enough inconvenience. She looked at me over her shoulder while pulling eggs from the fridge and said if I used the word inconvenience again, she was going to charge me rent for emotional dishonesty. I sat back down. Not because I was afraid of her, though I suspected she could do real damage with a spatula if properly motivated, but because some part of me wanted to see what morning looked like in her house when nobody was bleeding, arguing, or sleeping on outdoor furniture. Breakfast was bakery leftovers, strong coffee, scrambled eggs, and one oversized sweatshirt from a storage box near her back door because my shirt looked, in her words, like it had spent the night losing a custody hearing. The sweatshirt had the name of her bakery printed across the chest, Keen After Midnight, and it fit me badly enough that Marlowe had to turn away while laughing. I told her mocking a guest violated at least 3 Southern hospitality laws. She said I stopped being a guest when I drooled on her couch, which I denied with the confidence of a man who had no evidence. The whole thing should have felt awkward. Instead, it felt dangerously natural. She moved around the kitchen barefoot, sliding toast onto a plate, bumping the cabinet closed with her hip, asking how I took my coffee even though she somehow already knew. I found myself watching her hands, the little scar near her thumb, the way she leaned against the counter when she was tired but still refused to sit. It was not desire alone, though that was there, quiet and inconvenient. It was the ache of seeing a life I could imagine stepping into if I were not so good at talking myself out of doors. She asked about school, and I told her about my shop class, about students who believed sanding was optional and one sophomore who had turned a birdhouse into what looked like a haunted mailbox. Marlowe laughed with her whole face, and I forgot, briefly, that I was wearing her bakery sweatshirt and my life was technically a mess. Then her expression softened, and she asked whether I had somewhere to put the cedar chest. I said the garage. Probably. She asked if it mattered. I almost said no, because men like me say no before the truth has time to embarrass us. Instead, I admitted I built it the first year Sloan and I were together, back when I thought making something solid meant the feeling inside it would stay solid too. Marlowe did not give me a pity face. She only pushed the toast toward me and said wood-remembered hands, not promises. I sat there with coffee halfway to my mouth, hating how often she said things I would have to carry around later. By the time I left, the sun was fully up, and the street had begun its normal morning business, sprinklers ticking, garage doors groaning, dogs dragging owners down sidewalks against their will. I had my duffel over one shoulder, her bakery sweatshirt still on me because my own shirt had been declared unfit for public morale, and a folded bag of pastries in my hand that she insisted were extras, though I was beginning to suspect Marlowe used that word the way I used fine. We stepped out together, and for 3 beautiful seconds I believed the neighborhood might mind its business. Then Arlen Pike appeared at the end of the sidewalk with his little brown dog and the calm expression of a retired mail carrier who had spent 40 years learning everyone's secrets by accident and exactly none by accident. He looked at me, looked at the sweatshirt, looked at Marlowe standing in her doorway, and said the bakery must be expanding into overnight accommodations. I felt my entire body become a guilty appliance. Marlowe, on the other hand, smiled like she had been expecting him since birth. She told Arlen the couch had excellent reviews, but limited availability. Arlen nodded solemnly and said he would update the neighborhood newsletter in his mind. I tried to say something normal, failed, and settled for lifting the pastry bag like it explained my existence. Arlen's eyes twinkled in a way that suggested it did not. After he continued down the sidewalk, I looked at Marlowe and felt the old panic rise, not because I was ashamed of her, but because being seen needing kindness made me feel exposed in a way I did not know how to manage. She noticed immediately. The humor left her face, not angrily, but carefully, like she was watching a door start to close. I told her Arlen talked, and she said Arlen breathed, so yes, eventually. I said I did not want people making assumptions. Marlowe leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and asked which assumption scared me more, that I had needed help or that I had wanted to stay. I had no clean answer. The pastry bag suddenly felt heavy in my hand. She looked down the street, then back at me, and her voice softened without losing its edge. She said she would not be embarrassed for helping me, Rhys. She would not apologize for opening her door, but she also would not become another secret I only visited when life cut me deep enough to stop pretending. I stood there in her sweatshirt, in the morning light, with Arlen's dog barking at a mailbox down the block, and understood that Marlowe was not asking me for a relationship yet. She was asking me not to hide the fact that she had been kind to me. Somehow, that felt almost harder. Monday at school, I tried very hard to become a normal man again, which was unfortunate because normal men apparently did not spend first period thinking about a woman's kitchen while teaching teenagers how not to remove their own fingers. My shop class smelled like sawdust, machine oil, and adolescent overconfidence. I walked between workbenches correcting crooked cuts, reminding one junior that safety goggles belonged over his eyes and not on top of his head like decorative ambition, and helping a sophomore named Marcus turn what was supposed to be a birdhouse into something that looked like a haunted mailbox with ventilation issues. Usually, the noise of the tools settled me. There was comfort in measurable things, in angles, clamps, glue time, and the honest fact that a board either fit or it did not. But that morning, every time I reached for a pencil or tightened a clamp, I remembered Sloane's drawer, Marlowe's blanket, and the way she had said she would not be another secret. By lunch, I had almost convinced myself the night at Marlowe's had been a strange emergency and nothing more. Then my phone buzzed with Sloane's name, and all my progress folded like wet cardboard. Her text was short, polished, and familiar. The upstairs sink was dripping again, and could I stop by after school because she had a meeting and did not want to deal with another invoice? There was no please. There did not need to be. My thumb hovered over the keyboard while half of me prepared the old answer automatically. Sure, I can come by around 5. It was ridiculous how fast the reflex rose in me. I had spent the night on a porch because that house no longer had room for me, and still, one drip from a faucet could summon my hands like I was on retainer for a life I had already been released from. I typed 3 different responses, deleted all of them, and finally locked the phone without answering, which felt less like strength and more like hiding from a vending machine that knew my weakness. Across town, though I did not know it yet, Marlowe was having her own version of being seen too clearly. Later, she told me she spent most of the afternoon at Keene after midnight burning 1 tray of almond croissants and blaming the oven, even though her younger brother Bodhi said the oven had not slept on anybody's couch and therefore should not be dragged into family drama. Bodhi Keene worked the counter 3 afternoons a week, mostly because Marlowe claimed he needed structure and he claimed she needed someone charming enough to distract customers from her emotional attachment to overpricing muffins. He was 27, sharp-mouthed, and protective in a way that pretended to be lazy. Apparently, he watched her wipe the same spotless stretch of counter for 5 minutes before asking if this was about the sad, handsome cabinet man from down the street. Marlowe threw a towel at him and said I was not a cabinet man. Bodhi said that was a shame because sad, handsome cabinet man had rhythm. He knew enough, of course. Not everything, but enough. He knew I had stayed over because Arlen Pike had come by for coffee that morning and, with the subtlety of a marching band, asked whether the bakery couch was available by reservation or emotional collapse only. Bodhi thought that was hilarious until he saw Marlowe's face. Then he got serious in the way younger brothers do when they stop pretending not to care. He told her she had a type, and Marlowe said if he finished that sentence, she would replace his employee discount with brotherly disappointment. He finished it anyway. He said she fed men until they felt human again, then watched them leave with full stomachs and closed hearts. Marlowe told me later she hated him for about 12 seconds because he was not wrong. She had loved people before who liked her warmth but never wanted the responsibility of standing in it when daylight came. Bodhi told her I might be different, but different still had to prove itself after the crisis passed. I showed up at the bakery after school with her sweatshirt folded in my passenger seat and Sloane's unanswered text sitting on my phone like a dare. I told myself I was only returning what I borrowed, which would have been more convincing if I had not stopped at home first, showered, changed shirts twice, and checked my reflection in the truck window like a man attending a parent-teacher conference with his own feelings. Keene after midnight was closed for the late afternoon reset. The sign flipped, but the lights still on inside. Through the front window, I saw Marlowe alone behind the counter, stacking cups, her hair tied up, sleeves pushed to her elbows, looking tired in that focused way that made me want to carry something heavy for her just to be useful and also made me afraid of exactly that impulse. I knocked on the glass. She looked up, and for 1 second her face opened before caution stepped in and closed the door halfway. She let me in and said the sweatshirt had survived me better than expected. I handed it over and told her it had strong opinions about my shoulders. She smiled, but it did not fully land. The bakery smelled like sugar, yeast, and lemon glaze, warm enough to make the street outside feel less real. There were chairs stacked on tables, a mop bucket near the back, and a single tray of imperfect croissants cooling by the oven. I nodded toward them and asked if those were extras. Marlowe gave me a look and said I was becoming fluent in bakery lies. The humor helped for half a minute. Then she folded the sweatshirt against her chest and asked if Sloane had texted me. I should have lied. Not because I wanted to deceive her, but because honesty had been making a habit of undressing me in front of this woman. Instead, I said yes. Her expression did not change much, which somehow made it worse. She asked if I went. I told her no, but admitted I almost did. Marlowe looked down at the folded sweatshirt in her hands, smoothing the fabric once with her thumb. I expected praise, maybe relief, maybe one of those warm sentences she had a dangerous supply of. Instead, she said almost was where old patterns went to stay alive. That stung because it was true. I leaned against the counter and told her saying no to Sloane did not feel clean. It felt like leaving a leak to spread because I wanted to prove a point. Marlowe said maybe, or maybe it felt uncomfortable because I was finally letting a problem belong to the person who owned the house. I laughed under my breath and said she made boundaries sound like plumbing. She said everything was plumbing if you were tired enough. Then the silence arrived, the kind that had weight and memory. I looked at her hands, the sweatshirt, the bakery around us, and said I did not want her to think last night meant nothing just because I was bad at standing in the morning after it. Marlowe's eyes lifted to mine, and there was hurt there, carefully organized. She said coming inside once was easy, especially when a man was cold, embarrassed, and had nowhere dignified to go. Staying honest after the crisis passed was where men usually failed her. I did not have a clever answer. Good, because clever would have been insulting. I told her I did not want to fail her. She said wanting not to fail was not the same as choosing. Then she set the sweatshirt on the counter between us like a soft little boundary and asked what I would do the next time Sloane called, or the next time Arlen looked at us sideways, or the next time I felt ashamed of needing someone who was not obligated to need me back. I stood in that closed bakery with the woman who had opened her door to me, realizing the real question was not whether I wanted Marlowe. It was whether I was brave enough to want her when I was no longer bleeding on the porch. The broken prep table at Marlowe's bakery gave me an excuse, which was embarrassing because I had spent most of my adult life pretending excuses were for people who did not own calendars. She texted me a photo of one metal leg sitting at an angle that looked medically concerning, with the message, "Since everything is plumbing, if you're tired enough, is this also plumbing?" I stared at the picture for longer than necessary, then wrote back that it was structural betrayal and should be handled by a professional cabinet man. She replied that sad, handsome cabinet men were expensive after closing. I should have left that alone. Instead, I asked what time she closed. That was how I ended up at Keene after midnight at 11:30 with a toolbox in one hand and a heart acting like it had never been allowed indoors before. The bakery after closing felt different from the daytime version. No customers, no espresso machines screaming, no Bodie making comments from behind the register like a professionally underpaid conscience. Just low lights, stacked chairs, the soft hum of refrigerators, and Marlowe wiping down a counter that already looked clean enough to perform surgery on a croissant. She wore black jeans, a faded bakery t-shirt, and a bandana holding her hair back. with a streak of flour along her jaw she had not noticed. I noticed immediately, because apparently I was now the kind of man who cataloged flower placement like evidence. She pointed toward the prep table near the back and said it had collapsed during a disagreement with 70 pounds of dough. I asked if the dough won. She said the dough was resting comfortably and the table was being dramatic. It was such an ordinary exchange, and still something under it pulled tight, because we both knew I had not come only for the table. I knelt beside the leg and got to work while she moved around me, putting away trays and checking tomorrow's starter. There was comfort in the task. Screws, brackets, pressure points, weight distribution. Things that made sense if you looked closely enough and did not lie about where the strain had been. Marlowe leaned against the opposite counter with a mug in her hands and watched me. I told her if she was going to supervise, I charged extra for judgment. She said she was not judging. She was appreciating the rare sight of a man tightening something instead of emotionally loosening it. I laughed, but my hands slowed. She caught that too. She always caught the small shift before I could turn it into motion. After a minute, she said she was sorry if the other night had made things heavier. I looked up at her and told her the weight had been there already. She had only turned on a light. That quieted her. She looked down into her mug, and the late-night bakery seemed to hold its breath around us. Then she told me something I had half suspected and fully avoided believing. The pastries she left on my porch over the last few months were not always extras. Sometimes they were. Sometimes a tray broke, or a batch came out slightly too brown for customers with opinions. But sometimes she baked too many on purpose because she knew I got home late from school on Thursdays. Sometimes she left cinnamon rolls because she had seen my truck sitting in the driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. Sometimes she left bread because Arlen mentioned I had fixed Mrs. Voss's railing after work and had probably forgotten dinner. She said it with her eyes on the coffee, like confession was easier if she did not have to watch it land. It landed everywhere. In my chest, my hands, the space behind my ribs where I kept things I did not have names for. I sat back on my heels and stared at her. She gave a small, embarrassed laugh and said I should not look at her like she had confessed to organized crime. I told her she had been feeding me on purpose. She lifted one shoulder and said I looked like a man who treated meals as optional unless someone put them directly in his path. I tried to joke that I had excellent survival instincts, but she shook her head before the sentence could save me. She said I helped everyone on our street. I repaired steps, carried boxes, unclogged drains, built shelves, taught teenagers how not to lose fingers, and still somehow acted like needing dinner meant I had failed adulthood. Her voice softened then. She said she noticed nobody seemed to ask if I had eaten, slept, or been held together by anything other than stubbornness. I stood because staying on my knees suddenly felt too revealing. The table leg was half fixed, my hands were dusty, and Marlowe was looking at me like she was tired of waiting for me to understand the obvious. I told her I thought she was being neighborly. She smiled, but it trembled at the edge. She said neighborly was leaving one muffin after a bake sale, not inventing reasons to walk past my porch with warm bread at midnight. My mouth went dry. I asked why she never said anything. Marlowe looked around the bakery, at the counters, the ovens, the dark front windows reflecting us back like two people caught after hours in a life neither of them had planned. She said because I was always useful to everyone, and she did not want to become another person asking for a piece of me. Then she looked at me fully and said, "But I wanted you anyway. There are sentences a man can prepare for, and there are sentences that walk straight through every locked door he owns. That one did not sound polished. It did not sound like flirtation. It sounded like a woman who had finally gotten tired of hiding care inside pastry boxes." I stepped closer before I had decided to. Marlowe did not move back. The air between us changed. Not loud, not cheap, but charged with every porch light, every bakery bag. Every conversation we had pretended was too practical to be dangerous. I told her being wanted scared me more than being needed. Her eyes softened, and she said she knew. Needed came with instructions. Wanted came with risk. I looked at the flour on her jaw, lifted my hand, and stopped just short of touching her. She saw the question and answered by leaning the smallest bit closer. My thumb brushed the flour from her skin. My phone rang. The sound cut through the room like a rude little blade. I closed my eyes for half a second because some part of me already knew. When I checked the screen, Sloane's name glowed up at me, bright and familiar and badly timed in the way old patterns always are. Marlowe saw it. She did not step away, but she did stop leaning toward me. I answered because ignoring it felt performative, and because a man trying to change still has to face the thing he is changing from. Sloane said the sink was worse, that water had started spreading under the cabinet, and she needed me to come now because she did not know who else to call. For years, that sentence would have pulled me through the door before I finished breathing. I looked at Marlowe, at the fixed half of the table, at the woman who had just admitted wanting me without asking me to repair her first. I told Sloane she needed to call an emergency plumber. There was a pause so long I heard the refrigerator hum behind me. She said my name like I had misunderstood my assignment. I repeated it, calmly this time, and gave her the number of someone reliable. She asked if I was serious. I said I was. When I hung up, my hand was shaking slightly, which made me want to hide it. Marlowe noticed, anyway. She was quiet for a moment, then asked whether I had said no because I wanted freedom, or because I wanted to look brave in front of her. The question hit clean because it left me no flattering exit. I looked at the phone, then at her, and realized the answer mattered more than the almost kiss ever could. I did not answer Marlowe fast enough. That was the truth. The phone was still in my hand, Sloane's name gone from the screen, and the bakery felt too quiet around the question Marlowe had left there. Had I said no because I wanted freedom, or because I wanted to look brave in front of her? A better man might have answered immediately. A more dishonest man definitely would have. I stood there with dust on my hands and flour on my thumb from touching her face, and I realized every answer that made me look good also felt incomplete. So I told her I did not know yet. Her expression tightened, not in anger exactly, but in the tired way people look when honesty hurts because it confirms what they were afraid of. I said I wanted it to be freedom. I wanted to be the kind of man who could say no because the old life no longer owned his hands. But some part of me had also known she was watching. Marlowe looked away first, and that small movement did more damage than if she had shouted. She thanked me for fixing the table before I had finished fixing it, which was how I knew the night was over. I told her the brackets still needed tightening, and she said Bodie could call someone in the morning. That stung more than it should have. Not because the table mattered, but because I had been gently dismissed from the one place I had wanted to stay. I packed my tools slowly, giving her time to change her mind and hating myself for needing it. She did not. At the door, she handed me a bakery bag without looking at me and said they were actual extras this time. I tried to smile. It failed. She said goodnight, Rhys, and the way she used my name felt like a door closing softly instead of slamming. I drove home with the bag on the passenger seat and did not open it. For once, warm bread felt like something I had not earned. The next day, I did what cowards with jobs do. I became extremely professional. I taught 3 classes, graded project sketches, helped Marcus repair the haunted mailbox birdhouse, and gave a lecture about measuring twice that sounded suspiciously like a speech to myself. Every time my phone lit up, I expected Sloane. Every time it did not, I expected Marlowe. Neither of them called. By late afternoon, I had decided to stop by the bakery after school. Not with a speech, not with flowers, and definitely not with some heroic declaration in front of the espresso machine. I had repaired a shelf bracket for Marlowe 2 weeks earlier and never dropped it off. That was the excuse. I knew it was an excuse. I brought it anyway because apparently emotional courage sometimes traveled in a paper bag with hardware. When I walked into Keene after midnight, the place was open, warm, and busy enough that I almost turned around. Bodie was behind the counter, laughing with a customer, but his eyes found me immediately. He did not smile. That was new. Marlowe stood near the pastry case, wearing a dark green apron and talking to a woman in a cream coat I recognized before my brain wanted to. Sloane Merritt looked wrong in Marlowe's bakery, not because she was loud or rude. Sloane was rarely either. She looked wrong because she carried the clean, polished energy of the old house into a room that smelled like sugar and work and second chances. She held a coffee cup with both hands, smiling faintly, and Marlowe's face was composed in the way people compose themselves when they are being insulted politely. I came in halfway through whatever performance Sloane had started. She was saying she hoped Marlowe understood that I had always been a little helpless when left to my own devices, that after the divorce, she still worried because I tended to let things pile up until someone stepped in. Her voice was light, almost kind. That made it worse. Marlowe did not flinch, but I saw Bodhi stop wiping the counter. Sloane added that lonely men could mistake kindness for something more, especially when someone made a habit of feeding them. The bakery did not go silent all at once. It quieted in layers. A spoon stopped clinking. A chair scraped and then froze. Marlowe's hand rested on the pastry case, fingers still, and I saw the exact moment Bodhi was deciding whether prison would be worth it. The old me would have smoothed it over. I could feel him rising in me, calm voice, lowered shoulders, make everyone comfortable, protect Sloane from looking cruel, protect Marlowe from looking hurt, protect myself from having to choose in public. But then I saw the shelf bracket in my hand, this stupid little piece of metal I had brought as an excuse to stand near a woman I was afraid to want properly. I walked to the counter and set it down beside Marlowe. Sloane turned toward me with relief, like she expected me to become familiar. She said my name, and for the first time in a long time, it did not pull me toward her. I told her Marlowe did not take advantage of me. She opened her mouth, but I kept going. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady enough that everyone nearby heard. I said Marlowe found me on a night when I was too ashamed to ask for help, and she gave me a couch, coffee, and the dignity of not making me explain more than I could. That was not weakness. That was kindness. And Sloane did not get to turn it into something cheap because she was uncomfortable with me accepting care from someone who was not her. Sloane's face went pale in a controlled way. She said she was only concerned, and I told her concern did not sound like insulting the woman who opened her door when I had slept outside mine. I could feel Marlowe beside me, very still. I did not look at her yet because if I did, I might lose the thread. I told Sloane she no longer got to summon me when something leaked, define me when something changed, or speak about my life like I was a project she had returned but still wanted warranty service on. A man near the window coughed into his coffee. Bodhi muttered something that sounded like warranty service, with deep spiritual satisfaction. Sloane set her cup down untouched. For a second I saw hurt underneath her pride, and I did not enjoy it. That mattered too. Choosing Marlowe did not require me to enjoy hurting someone else, but it did require me to stop letting the fear of discomfort keep me obedient. Sloane left without a scene, which was exactly her style. The bell above the door rang behind her, and the bakery slowly remembered how to breathe. Bodhi looked at me like he was reconsidering several insults he had prepared in advance. Then he picked up a tray and told no one in particular that he needed to check on the muffins before he became emotionally supportive in public. Customers returned to their drinks with the disappointed energy of people whose free theater had ended. Marlowe turned to me then, and there was so much in her face that I could not separate it fast enough. Relief, fear, tenderness, warning. She asked if I had come to defend her. I told her no, though I was glad I had. Her eyes searched mine. Then she asked, very softly, if I had come because I finally knew where I wanted to be. I did not answer Marlowe in the bakery. Not because I did not know, but because I finally understood that some answers deserved better than adrenaline. Sloane had just walked out. Customers were pretending not to stare. Bodhi was one muffin away from becoming a witness for the prosecution, and Marlowe was standing beside me with her heart guarded but visible. It would have been easy to say I wanted to be there because the moment demanded it. It would have been easy to let public bravery pretend to be emotional certainty. I had done enough pretending for one lifetime. So I told Marlowe I wanted to answer her properly, not while the room was still ringing from Sloane's exit, not while I was holding a repaired shelf bracket like some sad metal offering. Her face flickered with fear before she hid it. I saw that, and it hurt, but she nodded, because Marlowe Keene was not a woman who begged a man to speak before he knew whether his words had roots. That night, I went back to my own porch. I sat on the same step where Marlowe had found me with a duffel bag under my head and the last of my pride folded somewhere beneath it. The porch looked smaller now. Just wood, peeling paint, a loose rail I kept meaning to fix, and a yellow bulb that made every moth in Knoxville believe in bad decisions. But when I sat there long enough, I understood what had really happened. that first night. I had not only been locked out of my house, I had been locked inside an old version of myself. The man who thought being needed was safer than being wanted, who believed dignity meant never asking for warmth, who could sleep outside rather than knock on a door and admit the day had beaten him. Marlowe had not rescued me from the porch. She had shown me I was allowed to stand up and walk somewhere I was welcome. I crossed the street with no duffel, no toolbox, no excuse, and no pastry debt to disguise the truth. Marlowe's porch light was on, but this time I did not let myself turn that into a rescue signal. It was just light. I knocked once. She opened the door before I could knock again, still in her bakery clothes, hair loose from its tie, eyes tired in the way they got after a long day of feeding people and pretending she did not need to be fed too. She did not step aside immediately. I respected that. A woman like Marlowe had every right to make a man say why he had come before giving him another room to hide in. I told her I was not there because I was hurt. I was not there because Sloane had embarrassed me, or because my house was cold, or because I needed coffee, bread, a blanket, or a couch that did not judge divorced men. I was there because, when the crisis passed, when I was standing upright with both hands empty, I still wanted to be where she was. Marlowe looked at me for a long second, and I saw the fight in her face. Hope pushing against memory, tenderness pushing against caution. She said she was scared of becoming another woman who gave everything and got thanked instead of chosen. I told her she should be scared if all I offered her was gratitude. Gratitude was what you gave someone for a meal, a ride, a repaired table, a night of mercy. What I felt for her was not that. I told her I wanted her in the ordinary hours, when nobody was bleeding emotionally, when no one was watching from the bakery windows, when the sink was not leaking and the porch was not making me look tragic. I wanted her laughing at my terrible furniture sketches, arguing with me about whether cinnamon belonged in coffee, leaving bread because she cared and letting me bring dinner because I cared back. I wanted the woman who saw me as more than useful and still expected me to become more honest and comfortable. She listened without softening too quickly. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. Marlowe did not hand out forgiveness like day-old roles. She made sure you knew what you were asking for, so I told her the truth as cleanly as I could. I said I did not want her as shelter. Shelter was where a man went when the storm hit. Shelter mattered, but it was temporary by design. I wanted her as home, and home was not a place to collapse only when life turned cruel. Home was where you carried groceries in, told the truth badly until you learned to tell it better, stayed for breakfast, fixed the broken table, answered the difficult question, and chose the door even when every other door was technically available. Marlowe's eyes shone then, but she still gave me that small, sharp look I had come to love and said that was dangerously close to a good line. I told her I had been workshopping it on the tragic porch. That got the smile I had crossed the street for. She stepped aside then. Not dramatically, not like a scene ending with music, just enough to let me in, and somehow that small movement meant more than any speech. I crossed the threshold without shame this time. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and sugar, and the same chipped mug of pens sat on the table like it had witnessed everything and would be telling Arlen by morning. Marlowe took my hand, not to pull me, not to lead me, just to meet me there. I told her I knew I would still get it wrong sometimes. I would still turn pain into work, still reach for jokes when honesty got too close, still hear Sloane's voice in my head on bad days. Marlowe said she was not asking for perfect, she was asking for present. I told her I could do present, then I corrected myself, because old habits were not going to write the ending for me. I told her I would choose present, every time I remembered, and apologize when I forgot. Months later, the porch became a different kind of place. Not a punishment, not a waiting room, not a wooden confession booth for a man too proud to knock. Sometimes I sat there after school with sawdust still in my hair while Marlowe closed the bakery. Sometimes she found me half asleep in the chair, not because I had nowhere to go, but because I liked being close to the streetlight that led to her door. Bodie eventually stopped calling me sad, handsome cabinet man and shortened it to cabinet man, which I chose to take as emotional progress. Arlen Pike continued collecting neighborhood information under the false identity of dog walking, and once told me Marlowe had smiled more since I started haunting the correct porch. Sloane stopped calling me for repairs after the second time I sent her the plumber's number instead of myself. It was awkward, then cleaner, then finally just life. The final time Marlowe found me sleeping on a porch, it was late summer, warm enough that the night felt kind instead of lonely. I had been waiting for her after closing, sitting on her front step with a paper bag of takeout beside me, and I must have drifted off while listening to crickets and the soft hum of her porch light. She woke me by saying my name, the same way she had that first night, only this time there was laughter under it. I opened my eyes and saw her standing there with her keys, tired and beautiful in the porch glow, and I smiled before I could make a joke. She looked at the takeout, then at me, and said, "Come inside." This time, I stood because I already belonged there. And for the first time in my life, being needed was not the thing that made me stay. Being chosen was. Have you ever been treated like someone people only call when they need something fixed, but not someone they would choose when everything was fine? Do you think real love is proven more in a crisis, or in the ordinary days after the crisis passes? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. If this story made you feel something, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.